Welcome to episode 110 of the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast, recorded live January 11, 2019. This is a show about Office 365, Azure, and the IT Pro and end user side of life, where we discuss a topic or recent news related to Office 365 or Azure and how it relates to you as an IT Pro. Today, we dive into Azure land and talk about the new AZ900 exam, Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. Pretty much, we cover all of Azure in 30 minutes, so let's get going. Good morning, Scott. I had something clever I was going to say, and I completely forgot what it was.
Were you going to talk about how cold it is outside?
No, it wasn't something cold. It was probably something about a Yammer web part and the fun I had with Twitter yesterday. I don't know.
I have a funny anecdote before we get started about it being cold outside. So I bought a new smart thermostat. I went out and picked up an Ecobee 4 when it was on sale, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, around Christmas time, right? Whatever, post-Christmas sale.
Yeah, whenever we spent all of our money.
Yeah, you know, so it seemed like a good idea. And Ecobees are pretty neat. So, you know, it's kind of like Nest or some of the Honeywell smart stuff. Smart device, hooks up, you schedule all your stuff online. It's got sensors. The cool thing about this one, or the thing that attracted me to it, was it has these little sensors that I can deploy anywhere in the house. Like I could just drill it. I could put them on the wall. They actually come on these nifty little stands, and the sensors sense temperature and movement. So they're motion sensors as well.
So it can detect if you're home or away or...
Yep. So that's how it's doing all that stuff. And then it ties into all the dinguses. So it does Amazon's, it does Google's, and it does Apple's with the HomeKit stuff.
What about Cortana with the Harman Kardon?
Well, you know, Cortana works with all the Amazon stuff, so it should be all good and ready to go there. So it's actually pretty neat. So I've got this, little sensor, like we put like one of them in one of the bedrooms in the back of the house, and it's one of the kids' rooms, and it's always like dark when you walk in there and you're going to trip over Legos or things like that. So there's hue lights in that room. So I queued it up. So and when anybody walks into that room between the hours of like 6 and 9 p.m., if the lights aren't on, turn them on. So they just come on automatically. So it's all doing that with the motion sensor, and then, it's getting the temperature sensing and all that other stuff. So that's all well and good. Super awesome, super guided hookup experience. Like you take the old thermostat off the wall and you just put the new one on, and they give you like little stickers to label all your wires and all those good kinds of things. So I did all this a couple days ago when it was still warmer here in Jacksonville. It was still like we were in like the high 70s.
Yeah, I was going to say 70s, maybe even hit 80 a day or something.
Yeah, so I was still running the AC some days. And so I hooked it all up. AC's working awesome, like got it all plugged in, ready to go, right? Like HVAC is rocking. Got this all figured out. And then yesterday it started getting cold, and today it's even colder. It's down to like 40 Fahrenheit, and it's chilly enough that I want to use the heat in the house and not just light a fire in the fireplace. So I went yesterday and turned the heat on, and I'm listening, and it just like it's running. The fan is running, and there's air moving out of the vent, and it's kind of warm, but it's not really all that warm, right? It's just kind of like air moving, and I'm wondering, like, is that the air that's already in the vent? So I just leave it running, like 2 hours, right? Just let it figure itself out. And the house is getting warmer, it's going from like 62 to 63 to 64. So I'm like, maybe this is just the way it works with this thermostat, not even thinking about anything. And I was kind of like, it sounds a lot quieter. Why is it so much quieter? And then I remembered it's because my outside unit runs the condenser. So there's actually a heat pump on the condenser outdoors. And so that runs in reverse for heat as well as air conditioning. And it was killing me. I'm like, why is the condenser not coming on? Like, did I blow something out when I wired this thing up, right? Did I cross a wire where the streams crossed? What went wrong? So I'm like running outside. I'm looking at model numbers on the condenser unit. Like, oh yes, it is a heat pump. But I'm going back in and I'm trying to program this stupid thing, because it lets you like go in and just program like which wires wires are in there and switch a bunch of functions around and things like that. And so I'm messing with every setting. And I'm looking at my old picture because I took a picture of the old thermostat with all the wiring. I'm like, did I wire it wrong? Like, what's going on? No, the AC works. No, the heat works. No, it's definitely got power at the unit. I got the multimeter out. I'm checking things at the condenser and at the furnace and just like really killing me. So I finally start like Googling around. I'm like, so what do I do? I've got this train unit. It's got a heat pump. It's not working. And I go and on their support forum, they have a little hidden away like link at the very end of like one of the FAQs. It's like and it's article about when I turn my heat on, the air conditioner runs. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. But when I turn my heat on, I do want the air conditioner to run. I just want it to run in reverse, right, for the heat pump.
Right.
So you open that article up, and way down at the bottom, it's got like a little itty-bitty picture that you can click in and zoom on, and it says, oh, by the way, if your thermostat looked like this before, it was probably just wired up wrong by the person who put it in here, and here's how you should wire it in the new one. Because a lot of thermostats, even though they have like conventional and then different wires for heat pumps, lots of people put the heat pump wires into the conventional stuff, and somehow the thermostat would just magically figure it out, which the EcoBees don't do for some reason. So I had to go back and like rip this whole thing apart. I mean, it's really not hard, right? Like it pulls right off the wall, super easy. And you just got to flip some breakers and reconnect some wires. But long story short, I got the heat pump working. It's awesome. I love my new smart thermostat. It is a wonderful device. But when you're hooking one of those things up, you definitely have to go beyond reading the manual.
Yes. See, and here I thought the story was going to be something like it was warm out. I put a bunch of sensors around the house and you've like put one too close to the garage wall or accidentally left one somewhere. And it thought the house was a lot colder than it actually was, and it got up to like 90 degrees in your house last night or something. Yeah. That would have been a good story too.
Yeah, I might take one of those these days. I did the first time I went to wire it up, I thought I was going to be smart because you've only got like, depending on which wires you're playing with like 24 or 5 volts for the wires coming from your furnace that are actually supplying power to the thermostat. I was like, do I really need to flip the breakers to do all this? No, I don't need to flip the breakers. I don't have to have these wires touching each other. It'll be fine, right? I think I can get everything hooked up. And of course, when I went to fish the wires through the little hole, that you got to like feed them through to put the wall plate on, it was like zap, 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 zap. Damn it. Gonna have to go flip that. I was hoping I had that moment like, did I just fry my furnace, like the motherboard on the furnace? That would not be good.
No, that would have been a very expensive smart thermostat.
Yes. That would have turned it from, like $150 endeavor into a like $5,000 plus endeavor.
Yeah. So now what you just have to do is go hook all this up to like Azure IoT or start pumping in a whole bunch of data into Azure.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's a webhook or something that I can play with and just toss some data into storage someplace.
Yeah. Because I know, like, I have the Nest ones, and I get the data from them, but I just get, like, emails with the data. I don't have historical data. It would be really cool to shove that into, I don't know, something in Azure or something in the cloud somewhere so that you could go see historical data, like, for the last 5 years on if you've gotten better, what it's done, how it's performed, how much money it saved you, or how much money it's cost you. That would be interesting.
I'll have to see because I did log into the web portal and it does have a bunch of reports and things like that, but nothing's populated because it's only been plugged in for a couple days. It needs 30 days of trending data or whatever.
Yeah, I always get like Nest gives me emails comparing this month to last month, which, I mean, it's okay, but I kind of want to like compare this month this year to this month last year because, like you said, November is super warm. December was actually really warm. January's been a little cooler. So it's like you've used the air conditioning less and the heat more. Really? Thanks. I would have never guessed.
Yeah. Your utility bill can tell you that as well.
Well, and I have ours set on the average, so even my utility bill doesn't tell us that. Because have you done that thing with JEA where you can go in and say, just bill me the average and not the actual amount each month?
See, that's the beauty of living closer to the beach. I'm not a JEA customer.
Oh, that's right.
I'm a Beaches customer, and the Beaches company buys all their stuff from JEA. But if I have a problem, I go to Beaches. So I get actual bills. It does give me a lot of that trending data and things as well through just straight Beaches.
Okay. Yeah, so I have JEA, and I get, like, my bill is within a few dollars each month because in the summer, they like they take a rolling average of your bill and just kind of figure it out so you're not like $200 in December and then $600 in July.
No, that's what mine does. Mine is very, very bursty.
Yeah. Mover is a cloud migration company that specializes in moving your company's files from file servers or cloud storage like Box, Dropbox, and Google into Office 365. Their patented technology makes Mover the fastest OneDrive file migrator in the world. Moving dozens of terabytes of data a day is a breeze. Use Mover's free, industry-leading migration guides or ask for a managed migration and they'll take the lead. With Mover, all your data is secure and intact. Running completely behind the scenes, you don't lose time, money, or hair while you transfer. Scan, plan, migrate, report. Migrations that don't suck with Mover. Visit mover.io for more info. Should we talk about another topic? Or we could just keep talking about smart homes?
Yeah, no, we can try and talk about a topic. And I think it'll be good. So we were kind of chatting in the background, and I went to a user group last night, and it was a really good talk on application insights and wiring up your applications and getting them all ready to go to monitor in the cloud. And not only monitor, but store your logs and have access to that telemetry over time for doing trending, right? Like kind of
Yep.
Like you were talking about with the thermostat. And I am admittedly a little deeper in some of these technologies, right? Like we work with it.
Really?
We work with it day to day.
Right. It's our livelihood. Day in, day out, we're in this stuff.
Yeah, it's the thing that pays the bills. And I am very guilty of losing kind of the forest for the trees in this one. And I always forget about things like fundamentals or maybe somebody who's just getting started. And what does that look like? And somebody asked the question during the talk, we're talking all about this monitoring and logging service, and the word telemetry is being thrown around. And somebody raised their hand and they said, "What's telemetry?" I was like, "Well, wait, you don't know what telemetry is?" And we're here at this talk all about monitoring and logging. So and speaker did a great job, walked it back and said, here's you go, grounded it, and we're able to move on with the conversation. So that got me thinking. There's a bunch of new courses that have come out, and we talked a little bit about some of the Microsoft certifications. And one of those new certifications is called Azure Fundamentals. So it's the AZ 900 course, and it's got a bunch of different things going on inside of it, but it is really a getting started with the cloud course. There's some things in that course or in that exam and certification that are certainly about Azure, right? Like don't get me wrong, it's a Microsoft certification. But one of the things it starts with is understanding cloud concepts and what do you want to do to just get started with the cloud. So maybe you're not super technical, or maybe your role is a non-technical role. What if you're in marketing or sales, or you work in the finance department at your organization and you want to be able to speak more intelligently to the folks who are providing your software to you in IT and educate them, or you want to understand how they're spending their money on all this new stuff in the cloud. Well, we've got to kind of take a step back and we really go to basics with just cloud concepts. And I thought it'd be fun to talk a little bit about just that. So kind of that first objective domain of AZ 900 and just understanding cloud concepts.
I was looking at this. I hadn't seen what this covered, and I would be curious to take this because you're right. It starts from the very beginning of like just understanding some of those terms that we throw around all of the time, and even things that sometimes us as IT folks, well, especially me being a consultant, I don't even always wrap my hand around things like capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. So it goes all the way from like terms and CapEx versus OpEx to the various services and monitoring Azure and pricing, and dives into some of the technologies. This looks like a really, really broad sweeping exam. And it's be interesting too to see how much detail it goes into some of these, because I looked at this and I'm like, this is literally understanding all of Azure in one exam.
It is to a certain degree, but I would frame it more as understanding what's out there and really just being able to describe what's out there, not so much being able to configure it and see how it works, right? So one of the components of this exam would be understanding Azure core services. So that's understanding virtual machines, it's understanding storage, it's understanding functions, web apps, it's understanding database services, all these things, right? And when I say understanding those, I mean, really, if I came to you and I said, Ben, you work for an organization and you need to quickly test some data in the cloud. You don't have time to stand up a server and you already have an Azure subscription. What are some of your options? And you might come back and say, well, I've heard that there's these database as a service options. That sounds like I'd want something as a service, right? I just want to stand it up and play with it and then tear it down when it's done. What would that service be? Oh, that would be Azure SQL or Azure SQL. And that's it. That's all you need to know, right? That database service is out there, that exists, and that it's a PaaS service.
It's more that ability to talk about the services and understand, almost match a service to a function.
Yes, very much so.
What does this service actually do? How do I configure this service? What are the technical challenges I need to think about? What's the PowerShell I need to run? What are the ARM templates I need to deploy? It's just, here's a function, here's a service that matches to that function.
Yeah, you need to know that there's this thing called a region, and you need to know kind of core concepts about how those regions come together, right? They're multiple data centers, they're built to be highly available, resilient, things like that. They're scalable all the way through, all that good stuff, right? And then you need to know that in those regions, you deploy those services, and you can't deploy all regions or all services into all regions. So there's a little bit of that. But then when it comes down to it, there's virtual machines. So you got to know that there's multiple sizes, but you don't need to know that, to create a virtual machine, you go to this place in the portal and you do this thing, and it has to have these performance characteristics and this many IOPS. And when you spin it up, it creates this NIC and this NSG and this VNet. And this is how I do storage diagnostics and all those other kinds of things, right? You just need to know that virtual machines are out there, and virtual machines are a service that you pick in the cloud. And by picking that service in the cloud, that drives into other fundamentals. Like you mentioned, like CapEx versus OpEx. Well, the way you buy that virtual machine is a little bit different in the cloud, right? So we need to kind of have a conversation and make sure that everybody's grounded in the billing model and understanding how that billing comes together. So when I buy a virtual machine, it is priced per second in Azure. And how does that manifest on a bill? How can I make sure that Ben's virtual machine is, I can allocate that spend to him versus my virtual machine? Well, we've got to be able to tag it. You don't need to know how to put tags on, but you need to know the tags are a thing, and that we can do that. So it all drives back to a lot of that.
Got it. So if we start, and again, looking at this, and kind of we've talked about the high level of this exam, but just kind of walking through it. So this exam just starts out right off the bat with understanding some of those cloud concepts. So some of the things we've talked about where it's the terms, understanding those, the high availability, scalability, elasticity, agility, fault tolerance, disaster recovery are kind of what they list on the website. I'm sure it dives into a lot more terms than that, but it sounds like as we march through this, it's just that. This isn't even matching. It starts even before matching services to functionality. But back to what that question was, what is telemetry? What is high availability? If somebody says, hey, I need this to be highly available, what are they talking about? What do they mean? That type of stuff. Even scalability, it's like, okay, so there's a difference here between high availability and scalability, and maybe even the fault tolerance. So what is fault tolerance versus high availability, and how does all that play into disaster recovery? Because those are all terms that, again, I feel like people throw around all the time, and even people that have been in the space for a while sometimes aren't even using them appropriately, aren't even using them with the right thought in mind in terms of what they mean. Or as you read through Microsoft's documentation about some of these cloud services and what they provide of, what Microsoft may mean by some of those terms when it comes to something like elasticity.
This is really a conversation about definitions for things and making sure that people understand the definitions. And then you can take that definition and apply it to the cloud. So let's throw Azure out the window for a second, and we'll just talk about cloud generically. So we're talking about terms in that case, like all those things that you brought up: high availability, scalability, elasticity, fault tolerance, disaster recovery. Those apply to pretty much any public cloud, and to a certain degree, a number of private clouds as well, and being able to run those up. So it could be Azure, it could be AWS, it could be GCP, and they might, treat those things differently, or how they approach high availability might be different. But at the end of the day, high availability is high availability. Scalability is scalability. So being able to kind of ground that and have a conversation around the basics is a pretty good thing.
Upskility is your cloud enablement partner to help guide your organization through all phases of cloud migration and adoption. As the leading global brand for enabling the Microsoft Cloud, their Microsoft MVP and multi-certified cloud solutions architect team has authored over 20 mock courses, the Microsoft Pressbook implementing Azure Solutions 7533, and several Microsoft Cloud practice playbooks for Microsoft partners. Upskility is the official learning partner for Microsoft, GitHub, Chef, Puppet, Databricks, Ansible, Red Hat, and many more technologies across the cloud ecosystem. Learn more about their advisory services and how they can help you reach and exceed your 2019 transformation goals at www.upskility.com/home/advisory services. So what other, when you start thinking about cloud concepts, I think this is another big one, and we kind of hit on some of the other ones and some of that terminology, but one other big terminology hurdle I see a lot of people running into, and I think people sometimes think they understand it, but don't totally understand it, and I can even fall into this trap too a little bit, is that difference between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, or infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. This goes in and just starts with, hey, describe each one of those. So do you want to walk through, again, if you're listening to this and you're just brand new to the cloud and you're like, I don't even know what those are. What are those different types of services that provide in Azure? How would you define each of those for somebody that would be brand new to this? And again, just starting to understand some of those cloud concepts and terminology.
Really, when you're talking about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, so that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, all the as a service things, those are referred to as cloud service types. So those are types of services that we can run in the cloud. And there's going to be other types of services as well. There might be like database as a service. There could be identity as a service. There could be recovery as a service. There's a bunch of as a service things, but something like database as a service really falls under the umbrella of platform as a service. We start out and we focus on those core three types of services. And generally what happens is as you move to a public cloud, or in some instances, a private cloud, depending on kind of what software that's built on, there are going to be areas that are going to be managed by your service provider. And then there's going to be areas that are managed by you as a customer. So there's this gradual progression or shift as we walk through each of those service types for the amount of responsibility that your cloud provider or your vendor takes on, and where your responsibilities shift within those services. So when we start out with maybe traditional on-premises workloads, you manage everything. You're responsible for physical premises, including physical security. You're responsible for all that HVAC, right? So you have to make sure that your heating, ventilation, and cooling works. You have to pay your electric bill. You have to supply the staff to get all that stuff up and running. You need to buy the servers. You need to configure virtual machines or physical servers, install the OS, IaaS, patch it, put your applications on it. You run the whole thing. When you start to make that transition to the cloud, though, you're in somebody else's data center. And you're not just in somebody else's data center, like you can't quite often provision something that's not a virtual machine. So it's not even like a colo or a co-location. You're just spinning up VMs. Well, if you're spinning up VMs, that means somebody has to give you the platform to spin VMs up on. So your vendor in that case, or your cloud service provider, they're going to be doing all of the physical data centers. They're going to be doing all the physical security. They're going to be doing all the HVAC. They are going to be doing all the physical hosts, all the storage, all the physical network layer, routers, switches, all that good kind of stuff. And they're also going to be doing the virtualization. You're just going to go in and turn a VM on. So when you think about like maybe it's, some people look at like the cost of a VM in the cloud and they're like, wow, that's expensive. Is it really? How much does it cost you to run a VM on-prem? Because that cloud provider is doing all that stuff and they're doing it at scale. They're doing it, in a multi-tenant environment for a bunch of different customers. It's probably way cheaper for them, right? Like you look at that cost to maybe run a VM for $300 a month and you're like, ooh, I don't know. I guarantee you it costs you just as much, if not more, to do it on-prem because they've baked all that cost for those vendor managed pieces in there. So that's kind of infrastructure as a service, right? You're going to own everything from the OS up. So you'll own the operating system. You'll do all the patching. You'll put your applications, your runtimes, your data. You control all that stuff. We make the transition up the ladder and then we go to platform as a service. And in that model, really now you focus on your application and your data. The vendor is going to pick up all the operating system, all of the middleware or any kind of runtimes you need, right? So I want to do a platform as a service for deploying a website. Well, the vendor is already going to have a web server for me. I don't need to go and turn a VM on and then add a web server to it and then deploy my application. I just start out at deploy my application. And then software as a service, the vendor does everything. There's really not much for you to do other than go in and say, I've purchased a service and I'm going to configure that service. So you'll have knobs and levers that you can pull to configure it, but there's no VMs. You're not really doing application deployments in the traditional kind of model. Now you might buy like a CRM. You might go out and get like Salesforce, right? And that's software as a service. And you'll go in and customize it. Maybe you'll add like a new field to a contact or to a customer in CRM. And you look at that as building an application-ish, but really you're just going in and configuring a piece of software at that point. You're doing knobs and levers to get things going. So that's kind of like the high level and break that down. I don't always like to describe the cloud that way, but it's kind of a good way to get grounded in what it is. But really, it's a little technical because we spend all the time talking about physical infrastructure and servers and runtimes and middleware and all those kinds of things. I also like to think about it, and one of the ways I like to approach it from the start is think about all of these models or these service types of software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and even your on-prem environments as zones of responsibility. So maybe within an on-premises environment, you're going to be responsible for just about everything. And not just that physical stuff we talked about, you're also going to be responsible for things like client endpoints, for data governance and rights management, for account and access management. So how do you do identity? What does that directory infrastructure look like? What are the applications that are not just deployed into the environment look like? What are the applications used to manage and model the environment? What does that all look like? So as you step through each of these models, we can actually think about them in terms of responsibility zones. So when we look at something like IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, physical host, physical network, physical data center always goes to the cloud provider. And then it starts to get a little fuzzier because we get into that operating system, network control, application, identity, and directory infrastructure. That's going to start to vary a little bit by the provider. So you might carry all that in IaaS, but in PaaS and SaaS, that model changes a little bit. Now, where it gets interesting is in any of these cloud service types or cloud models, you always own data governance and rights management. You always own management of client endpoints, regardless of which side that endpoint is on. You always own account and access management. So even though you go to the cloud, there's some things that stay the same. You might manage them in different systems, but you need to think about those and have those go all together. And then what we do is we start to think about ways that each one of these models can have benefits to you as a consumer of the cloud. So it's like anything else, right? You can pull out the spreadsheet and kind of do a pro and con column to each of these service types and what's going to happen. So maybe we think about something like attacks. So a threat surface, or what are my threat protection responsibilities? Well, attacks to operating systems, operating system administrators, like brute force password attacks to my applications, denial of service, physical attacks. Quite often, depending on the model, a lot of that is going to shift to your service provider. So you might need to do some research and say, hey, do they have the DDoS protection do I need? Do they have the right types of physical controls? Like, have they been through an ISO 27001 audit? Can I go see that audit? Yeah. You'll have to go and think about that stuff. And then you start to think about connectivity and how your users, and not just your users, but your administrators connect to that environment, how they administer it, how you're going to handle authentication, because you own account and access management. And really what happens is, as you go to the cloud, a lot of your stuff stays the same, but your ability to understand the cloud and the configuration of your cloud service provider becomes super important. Like, it is critical that you understand how these tenants are configured, how to deploy services, how to configure those services, and then how to deploy your applications on top of them and configure them after that.
Got it. When it comes to email, Outlook and Office 365 are fantastic, but sometimes there are things you'd like to do that aren't implemented. Sperry Software creates Outlook add-ins and Office 365 services that fill in these gaps. For instance, there are Outlook add-ins to automatically print emails and or attachments, save emails to PDF, send out recurring emails, or how about a warning when you're going to do a reply to all instead of a normal reply? Find these and many more email productivity solutions. Get started today by visiting www.sperrysoftware.com/cloudit. That is a very good description. Sorry, I got distracted. I'll admit it. I got distracted while you were talking. But yes, I
just pretend.
Absolutely agree that I can pretend I was paying attention to you the whole time. That all of those services do provide those different benefits. You have to consider them all. And one thing too that I think sometimes people forget is you don't have to just go with one and stick with it. The best environment probably has a little bit of all of that in there. Maybe you have some VMs that have some custom code that are running on them that you wrote, but you need them to grab some data out of a database. It doesn't mean you have to stand up a VM for SQL Server. Go use that platform as a service for your SQL Server and mix and match all of these services together to get that benefit from all of them based on what those requirements are for that particular application you are writing or that particular thing you are doing. Don't think just because you're using IaaS for one piece of it, you have to use IaaS for all of it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point of having people that understand these concepts is you're going to learn along the way how all this stuff does mix and match. So I think one of the things that happens over time is, and we start out a lot with people who are maybe new to Azure, and we say, okay, let's go deploy a virtual machine. And they think a virtual machine is just a virtual machine. Well, it's not. A virtual machine has storage associated with it. That storage is existing in a platform as a service. It's in Azure storage. So it has public endpoints and all these other things that you might have to go and configure. And then it has a network interface, and it might have a network security component that's wrapped around it or something else. But it's all a long-winded way to say when you're in the cloud, all this stuff does work together no matter what. So like you said, we have to not only recognize that a VM's a VM, but we also need to know that it consumes these platform services, and it's super helpful to understand what those services are. And that means now you might not know how to do it, but at least you know you have to go out and now take a look at that platform service and do that configuration and understand how you've kind of run it all up and where it's sitting and what it's doing.
Right. And even on the flip side too, like platform as a service, I think of SQL where that can even lead you into some IaaS stuff where now SQL endpoints you can add to subnets that are in your IaaS. And there may be ways you even need to secure some of that platform as a service, some of those offerings, leveraging some of the IaaS concepts. So there's a lot of back and forth between all of these. Software as a service might stand apart from the platform and infrastructure a little bit more. I feel like platform and infrastructure are like married, and software as a service kind of gets in there every once in a while. But like you said, and kind of the point of all of this is really having that broad understanding of what those concepts are and how you leverage them all together.
That's about where we start, right? We've kind of scratched the surface there. So that was cloud service types. There's also cloud service models. Like, what's the difference between a public and private cloud? You talked about like CapEx and OpEx. Well, what's the difference between those, and how do those apply to those different cloud models? What does it mean, when you go to the cloud and we talk about like economies of scale, what does that actually mean in the context of these cloud providers? So there's a bunch of different little bits and pieces that can be covered along the way there to get started with some of this stuff.
Yeah, we could probably spend a whole episode talking on that.
Yeah.
We could just keep going and going and going. It's like the Energizer Bunny.
We could spend all sorts of time on a lot of this.
Yes, but I know I have work to do. You probably have work to do. Toys to buy, money to spend. I have no idea. But should we wrap up for today? And we'll have to come back and keep going through this. We covered understanding cloud concepts. We covered one of the 4 segments in AZ900.
Yes. Well, we covered one of the 5 things inside of understand cloud concepts. So what I'll do for this one is in the show notes, I will put a link to the exam description just so people can kind of understand what the objective domains or what the learning objectives are for that particular test. Like if you are interested in this and that's something new. I'm also going to put some links in there to some resources around the web that get into being able to learn some of these fundamental concepts. So I'm going to put some links to Microsoft Learn, and it's videos and text, and there's some quick knowledge checks and things in there. So you can take little mini tests on the fly to see if you're picking up the concepts for, general principles of cloud computing, how to think about cloud types and service models, designing for availability and recovery. And that introduces you to a lot of this terminology along the way as well.
All right. Sounds good. So yeah, if you're interested in learning out more of this, go check out the show notes, sign up for mailing list, and then you get the show notes right in your email. It makes it nice and easy to click on them. And yeah, we will talk to you again next week.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Scott. If you enjoyed the podcast, go leave us a 5-star rating in iTunes. It helps to get the word out so more IT pros can learn about Office 365 and Azure. If you have any questions you want us to address on the show or feedback about the show, feel free to reach out via our website, Twitter, or Facebook. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.